Now, I'm doing a bit of bed prep for next year this year, and I'm using my hoe to tickle some of those surface weeds out. Now, most of the perennial weeds have already gone. They've been dug out, but I haven't been down here very often over the last few weeks. Well, not to do this kind of work. Obviously, I do for the noisy chickens. Now, this hoe's okay, but there is definitely better hoes out there, ones that you don't have to bend over so much. But it's one of those necessary things to take some of these surface weeds off. People are under the misconception that through the winter weeds don't grow. They really do. In fact, just 2 weeks ago, all the weeds were taken out of these beds here, all the way down there. And in fact, I think I did every bed here on our plot. Coming down this morning, there is definitely a lot of weeds growing. So I'll have to tickle the beds a little bit more with my hoe before I move on to the next step. Now, prepping your beds for winter, people do it in so many different ways, whether it's digging, whether it's double digging, whether it's just adding a pile of manure. Well, I did an experiment last year. I'm not one for really doing the digging and the double digging. Fair play if that's what you do. On our plot, it is mainly no dig, or the less invasive as possible to actually the soil. Now, last year I grew a couple of giant pumpkin squashes here. I think it was Pacific Giants, and they did do ever so well in this soil. Well, the ones that weren't eaten by those slugs. But I also put a thick mulch of straw down on top of these beds, and it has kept it really, really weed free. Now, some of the perennial weeds did push through, but they were easy to remove. The area where I didn't put that much straw down because I'd actually run out was actually inundated with the annual weeds that were growing here all over the plot when we first took it on last year, or maybe the year before. So after that trial of using straw as a weed suppressant, I'm actually going to do it again this year because I think it's made a big, big difference. Now, this bed here isn't no dig. It is just heavy clay soil in this bed. Now, we were going to turn it into a no dig bed, but actually I have got fruit bushes growing in this area, or I will have when I plant the rest. This is going to be a perennial bed, and whereas I'm happy to feed it with a bit of compost and things like that, I don't want to do the whole bed as no dig, because compost is a valuable resource and I don't want to put it into areas that's not needed. So as I add to my fruit hedge here, I'll make sure that the hole is really, really filled with some of the fresh compost. I'll also put fresh compost each year over the top, all around the top of the root ball, keeping away from the stem so it doesn't rot as we go through the year. But this straw idea, which I know is not a new thing, lots and lots of people all around the world grow successfully using straw as a mulch. But this way, I am actually thinking of implementing on many other beds, and hopefully it will cut down some of the weeding, because who wants to spend all their spare times tackling weeds and not enjoying the allotment as much as what they could be? But before I move on covering with straw on our allotment, I want to give the beds a good layer of compost. Now, this is our homegrown compost, or our homemade compost, and it is really lovely. Now, I only want to use a little bit of this one because, to be honest, this bit is for my other bed in the polytunnel, which I've yet to finish because of time restraints. But we have another 2 compost bins down here. I think the middle one may well be ready. If it's not ready now, it will be ready in the next month or so. The end one will be ready by February, March next year. And then we've got another 2 large compost bays at the top. They are taking a lot longer because they were finished not that long ago, really. And we were short of greens this year. Well, basically because of all the rain we've had, we didn't have as much grass cuttings this year. But I want to pinch some of this because I want to top my no-dig beds that I've already got with few centimetres, maximum of an inch, with some fresh compost. This compost will help feed the beds again, so we don't have to use any fertilisers. Now, we've already had an awful lot of frost this year. In fact, the frost has killed a fair few things off, but there is still growth here on our allotment. This compost bay was started early in the year, and it's pretty much green waste. It's stuff that we can get off neighbours, gardeners, anything we can get for free, because we all know how expensive and how bad some of the compost that you can buy in from the supermarkets, garden centres, wherever it is you're getting from. We are trying really hard each year to spend less and less on our allotment. And I think last year, apart from our seed compost, we didn't actually spend that much, apart from the other new polytunnel that we built, which again, all we had to pay for that was a few screws and the actual cover itself. And to be honest, with everything that we grew this year, it's probably paid for itself already. Now, once you've got that no-dig bed made, you are just maintaining it. You are keeping it as weed-free as you possibly can. And then once a year, you are adding a really good, healthy mulch. This will be taken down into the soil, and where the worms will mix it in. We have got such heavy clay compact soil here, but this is really helping to reduce some of the flooding. And even our wood chip paths this year, I've noticed, has really helped with the pooling of a lot of the water, because of course this year the rain has been quite bad. Now, I'm going to focus on the one bed today, but at least that's one bed less I have to worry about. Now, I've got some lettuces in here that have had a bit of frost damage, but they were going for the chickens anyway. It's nice for the chickens to have a bit of fresh produce through the year. Now, in general, I only add probably one wheelbarrow full to my beds each year. Now, my beds all vary in different sizes, so obviously it will depend on how big your bed actually is. But once you've got your no-dig bed, you really don't have to do much to it. Now, this is a little bit chunky, so I'm not going to stress too much about getting it to a nice fine tilth. And I can see plenty of little worms in here too. Now, these big lumps will break up over winter, and in spring it will be a lovely fine surface. But having the chunks really does make it a little bit more difficult to evenly spread out. But I'm not overly fussy. Now, because I've got lumps and clumps, this won't go as far. It got a lot wetter this year, our compost, because we have little holes in our roof of our compost bay, which in most years it's not an issue, but obviously it's been a very wet year. And apart from one more thing which I'm going to do, which you don't have to do if you've applied your compost mulch on top, because this is your weed suppressant. This will stop a lot of those annual weeds coming through. But I want to do one more thing this year. And it's this. It is the straw. Now, all the bales are falling apart in the shed, but this is what I'm going to use to cover and hopefully stop a lot of those annual weed seeds. Time is precious, but it shouldn't stop you wanting to grow. Now, like I said, you really don't need to do this with straw if you've mulched it with compost. But I really do find that it works quite well. Now, this year will mostly be for my beds that maybe I can't do properly with no dig. Whether I've got enough compost, because even though we've got all these compost bays, it doesn't mean that we're going to have enough compost to do everything that we want, simply because we're adding new beds this year. Now, I was watching somebody, I can't remember who it was, who grows through a massively thick mulch of straw every year. And he has the most amazing allotment. Really, truly inspiring. Considering so many people were telling him not to. Now, one of the main things that people think of when it comes to using straw is gypsophate. Now, that is a chemical that I myself don't want on my allotment. I don't want to use weed killers if I can help it. And sometimes it can be contaminated with this. Now, the place where I get mine from, which is a local farm shop stroke feed place for animals. And that's why I tested it up there, growing squashes and pumpkins in it last year. And it grew absolutely fine. So, and I know that the place gets most of their hay bales from the same person. So I'm hoping, fingers crossed, it's not an issue. But I was also reading that they're less likely to use certain weed killers anyway when it comes to a food source. This is obviously straw that was once wheat, maybe barley, depending on what they've grown and what they're classing it as. So this was actually in the food chain. But I also know they do use it to kill a lot of crops and weeds and things like that. So there is always that risk. But if you can try and source organic straw, which I don't know how easy it is, to be honest, then maybe that is the way forward. But people have been doing straw growing for a long, long time. This is nothing new. And even though I'm using this as a mulch to try and keep down some of these annual weed seeds, I will be using them later on next year, which I'll show in another video. Now, obviously, with the winds that we've been having here in the UK, we're getting quite stormy. There's a good chance of this actually being blowing around all over the place. Now, last year it wasn't too bad, but I think we've got yet another storm coming this weekend. So I might actually do something here to help hold down this straw. Now, we do get a lot of foxes here, a lot of foxes. Obviously, we get a lot of rats. So all that kind of thing can have an impact on your beds. At the moment, every day I come in, this bed has been dug either by the local cats, the local birds, or the local foxes. I used to get really, really annoyed. Now I just push the soil back in, make sure there's no cat feces and anything, and move on with my life. Now this bed needs a little bit more straw, which I'll finish. And then I've just got to figure a way of keeping it down on the ground. I don't want to use loads of resources, so I'll have to figure that out. Now, this won't stop all weeds, but it will stop a lot of weeds. It can also be used at the start of spring as a mulch to help keep the warmth in some of those seedlings and plants. But that will be a video for next year. Now, this won't stop all the weeds, but those annual weeds that you hoe, you come back a few days later and they've come back again. Hopefully that will work on this bed. It worked on the other bed and I'm hoping this year it will work on this. Perennial weeds, in my opinion, in general, your docks, your dandelions, those kind of weeds, I'm happy to use my hand trowel to dig them up. But this is something I just wanted to give a go this year. And obviously, as this does rot down over the next 6 months, 12 months, however long it is, it will decompose, feeding the soil below. So it is a natural way of doing it. Now, obviously you can use leaves, you can use all that kind of thing as a top mulch to help keep those weeds down on your beds. Now, I love using leaves. It is a fantastic resource. Unfortunately, where we get our leaves from, there has been an influx of dog walkers, and I don't want to be going through all those leaves knowing full well there is probably a multiple piles of dog poop. There is still so much to do at this time of year. It's your bed prep for next year. It is your paths. It's dealing with those weeds. So when you come in spring to do all your planting, you're not overwhelmed with the amount of weeds. They do grow quite quickly, even through the winter months. But that's it for today. But let me know in the comments, guys, what you'd use to mulch your beds, if that's a thing that you actually do. I know a lot of people use the straw method, they use the leaves method, obviously the compost method, which I've got a bit of both in this bed. But what do you do, or what would you like to try in the future to protect your beds through the winter months? Enriching it with extra vitamins and minerals and all the beneficial bacteria that your beds need to thrive, to grow those really good fruits and veggies for next year. Let me know in the comments. So thanks for watching, guys, and I shall see you in the next video.